Is this possible? All right. Well, technology will always do these things. And I really felt the passion and the insight and the knowledge from your comment, Hadiato. Unfortunately, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to access the language booth. I have to be in the main channel. So really, really sad that I couldn't capture that. But really, tying into where we are now going in terms of why this nexus matters. Indeed, women are rather the frontline responders. Women are the caretakers of the land. Women not only, when people speak about women and climate change.
Hello, Zukiswa. Sorry to cut you. I think the interpreter is trying to say something.
I won't. Are they in the main channel?
Let me try to. Can you?
Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear now?
All right. So Madam Hadiatu was talking about the image of the woman who is watering the floor, and she have a particular concern because where she is right now, this is what women actually face. And also she have noticed that there is no man around her when she's doing it. So she really understand, and the topic that we are talking about today, that women gender, is just a clear example of what she lives daily in the place where she is right now.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. And absolutely, Hadiatu, quite correct. I will give our interpreter time to get back into the booth. And then we can continue. I'm sorry, I love seeing the hands, and this is exactly why we are democratizing this knowledge. But like I said, the time is, I wish I could have the whole day. But we'll have more time, colleagues, indeed, to keep engaging. Right. So as I was saying, the narratives or what we often hear when we are talking about gender and women is either how vulnerable we are or how we are not able to do this or that and the other. And that, again, when we are saying women, sorry, my screen is off. When we are asking where are the women, or women are vulnerable, if we're not asking why are the men not as vulnerable as women, right? What are the men doing to combat, etc.? We lose the quality analysis that is offered by really fighting to have gender as a lens understood in how it affects cross-cuttingly. So yes, we are vulnerable, right? But yes, we are also, the ones who, even in this vulnerability, are responding first, responding quicker, and responding for more than just our person, as in this body. You are seeing that, I'm imagining in this picture, they tried to catch however many of the valuables they could, as well as the kid, to go across. Right here, you are seeing women trying to replenish, mitigate. If I said to you that, look, even as women make up a significant and sometimes majority of agricultural workers, when you think of the images of farmers in the media, who are you first to think of when you're thinking of who farms the land? It is not a typical quick image that, oh, but women farm the land. Women are such key contributors to agriculture and how we're able to eat. But the visions that we have in media, in society around who farms are visions of actually who owns the land. That is true. It's not women. They don't have access in equitable ways to the land. But really, when crisis hits, right, the same picture you're seeing on the right, it is the very caretakers originally before and after the crisis who will have to ensure that we think about how we replenish the land. But if I put it to you that like sometimes the rules around, ownership means that even post a crisis, that limits the ways women are able to access financing. In some cases, like the picture on the right, on the left, it is because, there's still some communities where women in certain parts of the world are not able to access their own bank account, right? And in the case of the right, people who own land are the ones who are then able to access resources rather than people who work the land. So what am I saying? Climate impacts are not gender neutral, affirming that, right? If we take the example here that women on average make up 43% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries and about 50% in our wonderful continent. However, as of 2010, only 15% of land in sub-Saharan Africa is owned or managed by women. So not even 15% owned, but either owned or managed. That's a really small number. And rates become worse in Asia with 13% dropping to 11% in the Philippines and 9% in Indonesia, and more cases can be made. So what can this one statistic tell us, for example? If women, own less of the land compared to men, even though they make up 43% of the labor force, what does it mean for women's capacities to adapt to climate change? What does it mean for women's capacities to mitigate? What does it mean for women's capacities to access climate funding, access climate technologies, and capacity building? Yeah, so we are building a picture now of understanding, yes, what gender is, what gender analysis is, and why it matters. Where are the women? Where are the men? Why are the women? Why are the men? And when we think about this devastating reality of an increasingly warming planet that is affecting everything from what we are able to farm and what we are able to eat, where we are able to access energy, how we are able to build sustainable housing, etc., you can then begin to see how critical it is to account in an increasingly in a world that is increasingly warming, and that warming having, drastic impacts on how we are able to live affects gender. I'm saying how we are able to live because oftentimes, even when we do talk about climate change, we are quick to talk about disasters, right? Climate-induced disasters, climate-induced floods, climate-induced droughts, etc. And yes, that is super important and critical. But what is also super important and critical is that it is not just outside of the context of disasters where we are seeing the impacts to climate change. We are seeing the impacts to climate change in our day-to-day lives. And the people who are burdened with the work of caring for families and their communities, etc., are the ones who feel that burden the most. I'll give another example. If you say that there's a case study of, I can't remember the country, but basically there was a climate-induced drought which lasted quite some time and had, as you can imagine, significant impact on the land, on the community. And one of the first things that was done to address this concern or to deal with it decisively was the marrying off of young girls. So young girls had to be taken out of school because when you marry off a young girl, you still have to pay the dowry. And that means that that family can secure something to eat for the next couple of months from that money from taking their girl child out of school into a marriage. So even as we had seen progress in that community around valuing education for the girl child, immediately when a crisis hit, which was a direct consequence of a warming planet, it was the girl child that was sacrificed to ensure that families do not go hungry. This is one of the more extreme examples of where we are seeing the intersection of climate and sexual health and reproductive justice, which is, part of the focus of gender. But this is to say that even the daily life of that 12-year-old, 14-year-old girl was disrupted permanently because of a disaster. And because that community, for example, did not have the tools or access to ensure mitigation or to access, other forms of funding to overcome this crisis, child was sacrificed. I am going to move now to, we've had a rich understanding of unpacking gender. We've had a rich understanding of beginning to think through why gender matters in climate change. We are going now to move into gender. Sorry, I'm just gonna quickly go here. Part 2 in terms of understanding now gender. And this is again an introduction only to the policy framework, because again, it was made known to me that not all of us necessarily are engaging at the same level or share the same knowledge. So I do ask for your indulgence for those who might know more. Before I jump into the next part, like I said, big on feminist popular education, democratizing knowledge. Before we move into the policy aspect, are there one or two people that are itching to come on the floor, to contribute, or shall we save that for a little bit later? I hope I'm not boring you as I try to get through the substance. Going once, going twice. All right. So we are not disagreed in the fact that climate change is not gender neutral, that climate change is, that around the world, gender generally shapes everything. And even as climate impacts don't discriminate, we are all feeling the consequences of warming. Certainly, the needs and experiences of women are a determining factor in how we feel this, especially women who are frontline, caregivers, responders, and particularly women in poor working class contexts around the world. So gender under the UNFCCC, and again, the UNFCCC being the highest decision-making body that is able to bring multiple parties, aka governments of the world, together the intention was to course correct. How can people come together under the UN mechanism to decide and define policy that is going to help us, course correct? But increasingly, one may argue that, the UNFCCC and these COPs are no longer fit for purpose, but that's a completely different conversation that's out of this mandate. So now that we understand the UNFCCC, it is meant to be the platform where governments get together twice a year to define the priorities and objectives of how they are going to deepen climate action and evaluate responses to this problem on a year-to-year basis. When it comes to the UNFCCC, there are different topics that are negotiated that relate to climate change. These are finance, adaptation, mitigation, technology and capacity building, etc., etc. Gender was not a standalone item until COP18. But this image, which you will get, is a useful mapping for those who might be interested in taking this advocacy forward, moving on to understand the landscape. So COP7, which was, I think, 2001, was the first COP to adopt the first decision on enhancing or strengthening gender balance. So initially, the COP said there's no representation, right? The numbers are too skewed. Why is it that it's just us, the men, who are deciding on the future of the planet? So we need to take a decision to ensure that we are promoting gender balance and women's participation in who is sent to negotiate. This was COP7. So for many years, the gender element under the UNFCCC was really based on numbers. Why are there no women negotiators? Why are there no women's heads of delegations? Why are women not participating in constituted bodies, etc.? Then a significant, I'm moving really quickly, I'm worried about time. COP19 is where the Warsaw International Mechanism came into effect. And that one is particularly important because this is when there was then a mandate that it's actually important to collect gender disaggregated data, which just basically means data that accounts for gender as well. Another important year for gender is COP20, which then adopts a 2-year Lima work program, which was looking to further, yes, we still want to see gender balance in who's negotiating for us in the UNFCCC, but also now it's beginning to mention more substantive understanding of what enhancing gender equality and gender balance means, by looking at how we provide knowledge and capacity building for gender responsive climate policy. Again, the Lima work COP21 adopts the Paris Agreement, right? And the Paris Agreement is the treaty which sort of like, if you would hear, keep 1.5 alive, etc. But in the Paris Agreement, we are seeing for the first time in the preamble, meaning the opening statement of the text, a call for gender responsive adaptation and capacity building. Long story short, I'm so sorry to rush through this. We end up at COP23, which adopts then a 2-year gender action plan, the GAP. Some of you might have heard of that. And the GAP is really, if I can use my liberty to uncomplicate it, it's sort of like, oh, sorry, my battery is dying. The GAP is essentially like the step-by-step pathway of like, then how do we make sure that this Lima work program on gender is effective? How do we monitor it? Basically, how do we put in this vision for enhanced action to achieve and advance on gender equality? How do we make sure that we live into this vision? And adopted the Gender Action Plan, and COP25 adopted an enhanced 5-year plan of the Lima Work Program and its Gender Action Plan, and COP29, which we are actually going towards, is a critical COP for gender, because this is actually when a decision on the review of the Lima Work Plan and its GAP is meant to take place. But as you would have seen, those who are engaged in that space, the COP29 presidency has defined and shared their plan for COP29 and their priorities, and there's no surprises there that even as gender is such a critical part of the agenda this year, such as well as finance, only finance, for example, is seen as something the COP29 presidency is willing to champion. But despite the fact that 2024 is so crucial in terms of the 5-year enhanced Lima work program and its GAP, we are not seeing it featured in the COP presidency's plan, which is not surprising given how gender is very much not taken as seriously as it should. Now, what's also important here is that why this matters is that efforts to enhance women's leadership and participation under the UNFCCC have been mandated for over 20 years. So even if, for example, we first hearing of the Lima Work Plan in 2015, and then its consequent renewals, and then its consequent Gender Action Plan, this has been work ongoing since COP7. So for over 20 years, this gender topic has been mandated. And so while we have seen progress in how gender considerations have shifted from more, we need women leaders, we need more women in the COPs, to now thinking about, more substantive policy interventions around how gender is mainstreamed, we are still noticing that the pace is we are not as far as we should be. In fact, we should not be talking about how we are fighting for mainstreaming gender, considering that this has been 2 decades worth of speaking about this thing. But unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. Now, the most notable progress in recent years, as I've mentioned, are the launch of the 2014 Lima Work Program on Gender, and the integration of gender in the Paris Agreement, and the adoption of the 2016 Gender Action Plan. Again, introduction to these texts, for those who might be feeling a little bit confused, you are more than welcome to, I'll also share resources to deep dive, but these are just the names of the policies that are intended to ensure that we speak to this intersection of gender and climate. So these decisions have aimed to enhance gender equality via both policy and practice. They are meant to encourage gender balance in negotiation teams. They are meant to encourage gender responsiveness to issues in the development, the implementation, and the monitoring of climate change policies and actions. And so even as, again, the key standalone decisions have been evolving since COP7, gender references have been included across thematic issues of negotiations, and these mandates are compiled essentially by the Secretariat. Now, again, we saw that gender moved from, we need more people that are women to negotiate on our behalves. We need to see more gender balance in the delegations, to now thinking about gender as this tool of analysis and ensuring that gender is understood as a factor across the board. One of the key pieces of policy for those who are interested in this is, of course, the Lima Work Program and its enhanced Gender Action Plan. What is the Gender Action Plan in and of itself? It basically sets out objectives and activities under 5 priority areas of how we get there. How do we get the visions of gender just climate action to be made a reality? And under the Gender Action Plan, 5 priority areas are basically accounted for, to advance knowledge and understanding of gender responsive climate action, and of course the important piece of mainstreaming in the puzzle, right? And this is work that is set out for the UNFCCC, the parties themselves, and United Nations entities at all levels, as well as advocates for women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the UNFCCC process. But anyway, to cut a long story short, these 5 areas are capacity building, knowledge management and communication, gender balance, participation and increasing women's leadership, coherence across the multiple thematic topics, gender responsive implementation and means of implementation, and then finally monitoring and reporting. So the enhanced gap, we like it-ish because it is more expansive than the original gap in its scope. And not only did the new gap move from a 2-year timeline to a 5-year timeline, gap activities under the enhanced gap also have a greater breadth and depth, meaning just the quality of the analysis and the interventions. And so the scope of the Lima Work Program has also expanded from, again, originally looking at gender balance in terms of numerical numbers, so seeing us only as numbers, and seeing us only as people that need to be capacitated and trained so we can do what the big boys do. It moved from that to actually recognizing the role of women, our unique knowledge, our unique experiences, and our unique roles as caretakers of the environment, of our families, in all climate processes at all levels. So we moved from numbers to more substantive sort of analysis, as we have shared in previous slides. Yeah. And so this year, once again, it is an important year to define sort of the next steps and the renewal, but we won't go into the politics of where negotiations stand on this matter. They're not very good. But I hope that this has given you something to spark your appetite to leverage on what already exists and how you can, you know, plug in to advance the critical to advance to advance the ways in which understanding gender and climate is so critical for how we are able to meaningfully ensure that we actually course correct. So why does gender mainstreaming, what is gender mainstreaming and why does it matter? So I've been saying this word gender mainstreaming. A 2016 technical paper by the Secretariat defines mainstreaming according to ECOSOC. So basically the UNFCCC adopted the same framing, right? Which is gender mainstreaming is the process of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action, including legislation, policies, or programs in all areas and all levels. It is a strategy for making women as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, of the implementation, of the monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs in all political, economic, and societal spheres, so that women benefit as equally as men and inequality does not become perpetrated. The ultimate goal of gender mainstreaming is essentially to achieve gender equality. Now, what are some of the benefits of taking a very systematic approach? Yes, it's good that we have gender as a standalone negotiating item at the COPs and at the SBs, but it's important to note that gender considerations matter for negotiations around climate finance, negotiations around technology, negotiations about adaptation, mitigation, etc. It's very, very important to ensure that there is a systematic mainstreaming. Again, one of the goals of the GAP, of course, is that coherence across all of these streams. When we mainstream gender, we ensure that climate policy and action is appropriate to local context by addressing the different perspectives, the different roles, rights, needs, priorities, and interests of men and women, also understood as stakeholders, not only as we are so vulnerable, that's why we need climate finance, oh, we are so vulnerable, we are caring for the crops. But yeah, that is very true, but also we are active social agents of change, even in these circumstances. We are the ones who ensure that we survive beyond the crisis. We are the ones who are actually already, doing or engaging in activities that minimize harm, right? In how we cook our food, in how we care for the water, in how we use our indigenous knowledge to care, to grow crops, etc. So our unique knowledge and experiences as stakeholders, given our role, is critically important when we think of designing interventions, etc. Climate approaches will also be more efficient, effective, and responsive, and ultimately provide broader benefits when women and men are included. Equal access to opportunities is a big thing. right? There are many case studies, for example, of how women are unable, how women have, the technologies in terms of their knowledge to mitigate against climate impacts, but the access to the resources and opportunities and benefits are uneven because of their status in society, right? Whether it's because they do not own anything, whether it's because they aren't able to access things as equally as men. And so equal opportunities, equal access is another benefit of mainstreaming. Empowerment of women where gaps exist, once again, in distribution of power, resources, services, participation, etc. But also how women's knowledge, women's concerns, women's experiences are then able to be taken into consideration, especially when you think about who women are in any society and community generally, Global South specifically, as custodians of knowledge, as carers and protectors of families and communities more broadly. So we really, really must insist on ensuring that women's perspectives and gender analysis more broadly is really not taken as this thing that is a pity, that is an act of charity or pity that men or the powers that be are granting us, but really advance the argument that it is literally a matter of who gets to live and who gets to die. And unfortunately for the men, if the women do not live, the likelihood that they won't either is a real consequence. Because again, we know who are the custodians of knowledge, of tradition, of and protectors of families and communities more broadly, etc. We're not saying that men are not contributing. No, we are saying that men's perspectives are made to be homogeneous and already accounted for. And if we don't have a strong enough analysis of gender, we miss the ways in which we could be more effective in ensuring that we all have a considered role to play in course correcting. And so policies have to be cognizant of that, that fact. I have to skip a couple of slides, colleagues, I'm so sorry. But I'll just make, let me see, which one do I want? Okay, let's make an example of like what's at stake when gender mainstreaming is not pushed forward. If you think of, let's do adaptation, right? Adaptation is the most topic that is mainstream. So how we are able to adapt. So adaptation actions, we know, reduce vulnerability and increase resilience to current and projected climate risks at national, regional, and community level. So how are we able to adapt to the climate crisis, right? But the unequal distribution of rights, resources, and power actually limits the capacities of people to take action on climate change. But we are seeing with adaptation, for instance, that there are several decisions that note the value of mainstreaming gender. The national adaptation programs of action, for example, have to be guided by gender equality. There's also decisions that affirm enhanced action on adaptation, et cetera, et cetera. With mitigation is like, how do we reduce the contributions of human activities to climate change? And if we are really fair, we as Africans really have no business in terms of we are not the ones who are meant to mitigate, but now I'm bringing other issues. Let me stick on cause. But essentially, mitigation is how do we reduce the contributing human activities to climate change? But we know that we are not the ones who are warming up the planet. But nonetheless, financing to allow folks to mitigate, for example, is hindered by the lack of gender sort of mainstreaming and thinking through what are the barriers and what are the gender impacts of those barriers, even as there is considerable evidence of the key role that women play in activities. Rushing, again, the same is true for technology. But what I want to stress here also is that Gender considerations are important to ensure women and men have equal access to the value chain of climate responsive technologies and economic opportunities, right? You might have seen in many of our countries, we know that there's green funding or green this or whatever, but who is actually able to access and who is actually needing to push these solutions in their countries. But anyway, in order to achieve the above, it's necessary to overcome various barriers that disempower women from engaging fully. The critical point of technology here is just something to think about, is that even as technology and innovation, when you think of technology, just like when I made the example of when you think about who is a farmer, you think of a man, even though we know who takes care of the land. When you think about technology, who do you think about? You're seeing a white man, probably from the global north, who's developing Facebook. And that's what we understand as technology. But we know that in many of our countries in the global south, it is traditionally our work to gather wood, provide food, generate income, etc. And also, even our indigenous knowledge are often not accounted as technology. If technology, the term itself, is simply sort of like something that is related to developing efficient ways of doing something, which is what technology is at its core, efficient ways of doing something. There are multiple ways in Africa alone that we can account how we are actually innovators of technology, particularly when it comes to caring for the land. Right? So even how technology is understood is very much not accounting for what actually technology is, what is the purpose of climate technology, and women in the global south and Africa in particular are already and have been approaching our relationship with the land in very ingenious, innovative ways, but that is often not considered as technology, which is of course incorrect. Yes, technology can be Facebook because Facebook allows us to connect with people more easily, but yes, technology can also be innovative ways to grow a particular seed because that allows us to be able for the seed to survive in different contexts. If that's not technology, I don't know what is. But because we understand technology in a way that excludes women's value and knowledge, particularly global South women, it means that the technologies that women are actually producing are unaccounted for because of this gender-blind understanding of how we contribute and play a role, and what we understand as adaptation, as climate technology, as capacity building, etc., etc. I'm almost there. What does all this mean for us? Skip some slides. But strengthening women's voices and leadership by increasing their confidence, their negotiation and communication skills to participate in informal and formal decision-making spaces, especially related to climate services, adaptation planning, or natural resource management, such as land and water, are critical to building our collective resilience. I have really tried to paint a picture of the many ways in which we are literally contributing so significantly to the climate crisis. I've also accounted for the many ways in which, of course, we are impacted and how an analysis of gender can undermine that. And I hope I've also painted the picture of why it is so critical for us to insist, particularly for us as a continent, that those women in the villages do not need to be able to speak the English of the UNFCCC or to read a gender action plan that says that we must be coherent. We are doing those things in practice. And so how do we fight and insist for those voices and for that leadership and for those perspectives to really take the space that they need to be taking in these spaces? Those of us who are able to get to those spaces, what is our accountability to the communities that we come from, and how do we actually create the space and open the space for key aspects around who gets climate financing, who gets capacity building, what's understood as capacity building, who is supposed to transition, right? And these many transitions, like you must transition, right? We have to unfortunately adapt because of your actions and that kind of thing. So really here, it's just that how are we strengthening our confidence and leadership and communication skills and understanding of these topics to recognize ourselves in this work, to course correct, to recognize our expertise, to recognize our contributions to ensuring that we survive this crisis. Finally, skipping, this was meant to be a shared exercise that we do. I have to skip. But in conclusion, some strategies to advance gender mainstreaming. This is not like, this is what you must do, but I wanted to use this section to go through a deep dive of what these can look like, but I don't have time. I literally have 2 minutes. But collective advocacy to advance gender just climate action under the UNFCCC and taking this approach collectively, right? How are we getting plugged into existing institutions and the advocacy that people before us have made to ensure that our voices are included? There are African women who have been engaging the UNFCCC since inception, right? Yet the regionalization process, for example, in one constituency out of 9 is accounting for that. So the Africa WGC has been built. How are we making sure that we contribute and ensure that we are able to strengthen it? How do we make sure that we are contributing to the global WGC and ensuring that, you know, our voices as African advocates are put forward, and we are ensuring that we are capacitating ourselves with the knowledge, building the confidence, you know, going back into our communities, etc. Advocacy for expanded and direct access to climate finance. The reality is that the Global North does owe us a lot, right? In fact, they are able to call themselves developed countries because they have used and abused and exploited our resources, our labor, for centuries and centuries to get to call themselves developed at our expense. So when we are fighting for climate finance, for example, it is not a justice, a charitable exercise. It's a matter of justice. So how are we connecting with African negotiators? How are we inspiring, you know, advocacy that insists that Africa gets what Africa is owed? Advocacy can also look like expanded and increased capacities for critical stakeholders, such as what is called the National Climate Change Gender Focal Points, right? Because of time, this was not in my scope anyway, but every country from the policy that we went through, the Lima Work Program, etc., mandated to appoint national climate change and gender co-focal points, which are people who are meant to ensure that country delegations are really on the mark when it comes to that. Where is the financing for ensuring that this is sustainable? Where is the capacity and training to ensure that, you know, national climate change, gender focal points are able to engage equally and equitably, etc. But really, the bottom line here is that gender is not, climate crisis is not gender neutral, and we cannot think about the climate crisis only from a perspective of disaster, because we also know that even outside of disaster, we are feeling climate impacts. If we are going to stand a chance to course correct regionally, globally, it has to involve thinking and analysis that accounts for gender as a lens. Where are the men, but also where are the women? Why are the men not there, but also why are the women not there, right? And it's actually going to need strategies that really value community in the sense of collective advocacy to ensure that we are heard at the global level, but that also we are building the mechanisms to ensure that the work that we do at this highest level translates globally, translates regionally, nationally, and most critically, globally. Some of you may be passionate about advocating and are doing the advocacy of climate funding. Some of you are doing the advocacy and adaptation, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, strategies to advance gender mainstreaming need to be collective in nature, need to demonstrate commitment to advancing an analysis of gender, and certainly understanding gender as a structural barrier that, unfortunately for us as the Global South, does not come outside of also thinking about colonialism, imperialism, racism, and all of these systems. There's a lot more to dive into, but I really hope, colleagues, that at least for what I was meant to share, which was the gender and climate intersection, has been super useful. I can't go through the rest of the things. I'm trying to respect time. This was meant to be the first sort of part of our questions and discussion, but I do understand that I am out of time to the interpreter. I was trying to balance the time and speaking softly, slowly. To all of you for staying on till so long, in case some things are repetitive, I'm very grateful to have the privilege of your time, and very grateful to the Africa Women and Gender constituency for the invite. And I guess I will hand over to the session facilitator. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Zukiswa. This was it was quite an interesting conversation on my side. And indeed, as women, our unique capacities as caregivers need to be enhanced beyond just caregivers to bring us to the decision-making table, for us to be able to translate what we do in action to what we put in maybe policies and even decision-making at the broader level. Dear colleagues, we've heard from Zukiswa. She has really done a lot of work in demystifying gender as it is enshrined under the UNFCCC. And so much, she said so much. I hope we all took notes like I did. For myself, I have a lot of notes, and we've seen the work that has been done in mainstreaming gender into the policies of UNFCCC. We've seen the Lima Work Program, and we've seen the activities. We've seen how the objective of the program ranging from the capacity building to monitoring and reporting. In the next few minutes, we'll just take questions or contributions from participants so that Zukiswa can respond to these concerns or hear your contributions or feedbacks, and then we'll proceed to the next session for the day. So if there are any questions, please kindly indicate by raising your hand and you'll be allowed to speak. And you can also use the chat box. We are actively paying attention to the chat box. Okay, there are hands. And let's see. Okay, so I'll go through the questions and then you allow the speakers to speak. So, okay, we have Hadita Kamara. If you can hear me, you can unmute your mic and speak, please.
Rebonjour. Je peux parler?
Allez-y, parlez.
Très
Ok.
bien. Alors, d'abord, je remercie Madame pour cette brillante intervention. En tout cas, elle a été très passionnée. Ça se voyait qu'elle était très engagée, une femme très engagée pour la cause climatique, très passionnée. Elle a démontré toute une virilité, si je peux m'exprimer ainsi. En tout cas, j'ai beaucoup aimé cette belle intervention. Elle a parlé d'engagement. Je dirais qu'en ce qui me concerne, au Sénégal, moi, j'ai décidé de mettre effectivement mon engagement au service de la protection et de la préservation de l'environnement afin qu'on puisse transformer durablement avec les femmes les économies en Afrique, car pour moi, c'est l'unique condition pour atteindre le bien-être et l'épanouissement complet, voire total, de la junte féminine dans le contexte africain. Et c'est vrai que j'ai l'habitude également de le dire souvent, notre environnement est malade. Et qui dit environnement malade, dit tout simplement humanité malade. Et ce n'est pas le contexte de ces phénomènes extrêmes que nous sommes en train de vivre actuellement en Afrique, particulièrement en Afrique subsaharienne, avec les inondations en Guinée, comme on l'a vu, la montée des eaux au Sénégal, les inondations au Mali, avec les chaleurs extrêmes, mais aussi les guerres qui nous dira le contraire. Moi, j'ai l'habitude de dire que cette crise que traverse le monde aujourd'hui n'est rien d'autre qu'une crise environnementale. Et la solution ne saurait être qu'une solution environnementale, mais portée par les femmes. Il est temps pour moi, ma conviction est la suivante, il est temps que les femmes se réapproprient l'ensemble des valeurs cardinales qui faisaient l'équilibre naturel de la Terre. Et il y a un rapport qui est sorti en 2021 de l'OMM, l'Organisation mondiale de la météorologie, qui alertait que d'ici 2030, si on ne fait rien, 118 millions d'Africains seront confrontés à l'extrême pauvreté, mais aussi à l'extrême famine, et les 70% de ces 118 millions seront des femmes. Raison pour laquelle, en 2021, j'avais décidé d'organiser la grande marche historique des femmes pour la justice climatique. Et on avait fait une pétition qui a été signée par plus de 1000 femmes un peu partout en Afrique. On avait également mis en place un mémorandum qu'on avait déposé sur la table du président de la République. J'ai une question justement à Women, Gender and Constituency pour savoir, une fois qu'on aura organisé cette année pendant la pré-COP, cette
Hello,
marche des
Madame
femmes pour la
Hadiatou.
justice climatique. Oui? Oui, hello. Hello, est-ce que vous m'entendez? Donc, je vais finir si vous m'entendez. Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez. Ma question serait de savoir, une fois qu'on aura organisé cette année la marche des femmes pour la justice climatique, est-ce qu'on pourra déposer
Madame
notre
Hadiatou,
mémorandum? Oui,
hello,
oui.
I was trying to say if you can try to round up so that we round up this session because the host has to go and our next facilitator is waiting to take her session. So if you can try to round up, interpreter, if you can help interpret the message to Hadiatou to try to round up her message so we can have the next session.
D'accord, ça marche, j'ai compris. Donc, à la prochaine session. Très bien, c'est bien noté. Je vous remercie.
Okay, interpreter, if Hadiatou is done, if you can interpret the question briefly so that Zikiswa can respond. Also, there's Zikiswa has, for those who were asking to join WGC, a link has been shared in the comment box, in the chat box. You can click the link to go through the link on how you can join the platform.
Can I, Jennifer, can I make my contribution while we are waiting, please?
Please hold on, please. No, please hold on, Pastor Blessing. You have to hold on while we try to sort this out so that the facilitator has to go.
I think the interpreter can move, please move into the channel like you did with the last time.
Okay, Ken, if you are there, please allow the interpreter to speak.
Mm-hmm. If you could move to the main channel interpreter so that you can just translate, or if there's other French speakers who can support with that on the floor, that would be very helpful.
Okay, the interpreter is in the main platform. I don't know. Emmanuel, can you hear me? If you can hear me, please can you interpret what Madam Hadiatou spoke about earlier?
Interpreter,
Okay, so it seems we don't have.
I think the host has to allow, can you unmute his mic? His mic is muted.
Okay, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, interpreter, you can go ahead. Interpretation. Interpretation.
Oh, can you get me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
So Madam Abiatu was asking about, her worry was about she's worried about the situation in her country, Senegal, where and other that climate change really affects the population. Hello.
Hi, can you frame she's worried about how climate change?
Hello, Emmanuel. We've lost you. We can't hear you.
So,
Can I make a recommendation that maybe if the interpreter can share with the speaker, that they can write me an email with the question, and I'll be able to use an app to translate it and respond thoroughly via email, if that's okay.
Okay, excellent. So
I'm sorry, I'm a
participants,
little worried that my microphone, I don't know what is wrong. It is interrupting.
okay, so participants, Tukiswa have just shared that all the questions be collected and they'll be shared to her via email and she would respond. So I will share her email with you. If you have any questions, you can share with her via email and she will respond to you. Her email is also in the chat box, and for those who will miss it, I will send directly to you in case you miss the email.
So shall we take another question then, or do we just move on to the next session?
Yes, we'll just move on since we are already behind our schedule. So thank you so much, Kiswa, for your time. Thank you for the knowledge and capacity. Thank you for investing in women, and we hope that the representation of women and mainstreaming of gender will continue to go on and forge on at all realms, from the local communities to national, regional, and down to the global platforms as it is going. Thank you very much for your time. So for now, we say bye.
Thank you all so much for the platform, for your very encouraging and kind words. And I'm very sad that I am missing out on Titi's incredible presentation that is forthcoming, but it's been a real pleasure. Please email me your questions. I will be looking out for them and responding, and really apologies that I have to jump off. Thank you all so much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Au revoir. Bye. Au revoir. Okay. Thank you everybody for your commitment and show of interest in this learning platform. We are happy to have you. We are happy that we have you committed to this learning exchange program. So our next facilitator is going to be taking us on climate finance. And just to briefly introduce the next facilitator. Hello, Titi, are you here? If you can hear me, please unmute and say hi so that I go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Titi, I can hear you. Sorry, there was an interruption in my mic.
Hello?
Hello, Titi, I can hear you.
Me?
Can you hear me?
Oh, great. Yeah, I can.
Okay, good to have you here. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so our facilitator is Titilayo Bamisola. Gbemisola Akosa. She's the Executive Director of Center for 21st Century Issues and one of the alternate civil society observers to the Green Climate Fund. Titi is dedicated to gender advocacy, environmentalists, community mobilization, and defending of vulnerable individuals' rights. She holds a law degree from the Lagos State University and the Nigerian Law School. Okay, sorry. I needed to slow down for the interpreter. Okay, Titi holds a law degree from Lagos State University and the Nigerian Law School, and she's also a member of the Nigerian Bar Association. Over the years, Titi has received trainings in sustainable environmental management from the University of California, and has participated in the International Visitor Leadership Program in the United States. In addition, she pursued a master's in law degree at the University of Lagos and had completed advanced leadership training programs at the Lagos Business School in Nigeria. While her work has evolved extensively on governance, health and environment, climate change, renewable energy, poverty alleviation, and women's empowerment at both national, international, and subnational levels. She's particularly passionate about addressing issues affecting her local community. As a result, she leads and supports various group development networks and coalitions within and outside Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us, Titi. We are glad to have you here. So this is me handing over to you now, Titi.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. I hope I'm right.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really sorry I may not be able to share my screen or my picture online because the internet I have is so terrible. I've been coming in and out, so at least I'm a bit stable now. So it's fine that I should just speak from without you seeing my face. I hope I'll be able to show my face maybe sometime when I'm through with the presentation. So this afternoon, we are going to be looking at climate finance. But before we start, I don't know whether we have a Mentimeter, but if not, a question to all of us before we start. And you can, send your response in the chat box. I want you to rate yourself in terms of how well you understand the climate finance. And your rating is from 1 to 5. Number 1 being that you know it very well, and number 5 being that you don't know it very well. So in between is either you know it a bit or in between. So I want to quickly rate yourself now in your understanding of climate finance. Just drop it, whether it is 1, 2, 3, or 5. Let's know how far at least you understand climate finance. I think I can see some say 4. I can see 2. Wow, Faustina, you're rating yourself 2. I see Jordan, group chat 2. Who again? Please rate yourself. Everybody should try. 2. I can see Pastor Blessing. I can see Ngwase. I can see Muhongora. I can see Risato. 3. Anna. Tinashe. Tinashe, you did not rate yourself. Okay, 2. Okay, fine. Who again? We have Queen. 2. It's like we have a lot of 2 here. Who again? So it means that I'm talking to the converted, those who understand 2, who understand it. People are not taking 1. Yes. think I've only cited 1, 4 or so. Who again? We have 3. Yes, we have another 3 in between. Oh, so if you say 5, Faustina, it means that you don't know much. Number 1 means that you know it very well. Then you go down to number 5 that I don't know it at all. Some say 4. Who again? Quite interesting that it means that we are at different stages of understanding climate. Oh, somebody is confused. Rate yourself between 1 and 5. 1 being that I know it very well, perfectly. And number 5 being the last, I don't know it at all. That's in between. Then in between is 2, 3, and 4. Oh, from my heart. Somebody says 4. Oh, people are getting it better now. So whichever way you find yourself, or whatever level you find yourself, what matters is that we are all here today and we are trying to learn something about climate finance. And whatever you have learned before, with what you are going to learn here today, is going to help you and it's going to enrich your understanding of climate finance. So let's go to the first slide. So I want us to set the scene for this meeting. I want to just make some important statements. You must have heard a lot of these statements before, but there's something we need to really reflect on as we journey into this presentation. One thing about climate finance is that it's about money, whether you like it or not. It is money issue. And all countries, whether developed or developing, least developed, we all need this money. Even if it is not for climate finance, we need it for developmental issues. So, and now that we are facing climate change, the urge and the need, the urgency and the need for climate finance is very much now, because we are facing the worst impact, especially for those of us who are from the global south, and more especially those of us who are from Africa. So whether we like it or not, climate finance is very critical to helping us to drive climate action in our countries. Hello, can you hear me better now? Hello, can you hear me better now? Can someone hear me better? Hello?
Hello, Titi, we can hear
Hello, can
you.
you hear me better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So, understand that. The next is all aspects of climate change responses and negotiations. They all involve climate finance, whether you call it adaptation, whether you call it loss and damage, whether it is technology, whether it's the gender action plan, whether it is agriculture, whatever you are talking about around climate change, it talks about money. You need money to actually deliver on those issues. And under the UNFCCC, developed countries who are responsible for historical emissions, this is very critical. We must never forget this, because each time we forget this, it means that we are almost losing the very foundation of climate change. That some people have caused climate change. Some people are being affected more than the others. Some people are ready to address it. Some people are less prepared to adapt, not really because they don't want to prepare, but they don't have enough finance. And the severity of climate finance on them is more so much. So that's why it's like that. So we must never forget those who have put us in these problems. And those people are the ones that are supposed to support our adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage measures. And UNFCCC has laid that bare in the convention. It's very clear in the convention. Then the Paris Agreement also reaffirms this obligation. But one thing that Paris Agreement added to it is that finance can be got from different places. Unlike before, finance is from Annex 1 countries that have caused climate change, they're the one. But even in the reaffirmation in Paris Agreement, they are supposed to take the lead in mobilizing this finance. And the finance we are talking about, we are talking more of grants rather than debts, loans. But as we journey on, you will see what is happening. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So before we go on, I want us to look at some concepts that is related to climate finance. I don't know whether you have been seeing all these, whether you have met them before. We have climate finance. We have green finance. We have gender responsive climate finance. And we have gender and climate smart finance and investment. They are different issues completely. Looking at this PowerPoint, please, I want you to read it and internalize it by yourself. First, climate finance is the one everybody understands, and UNFCCC have defined it for us. Local, national, transnational finance run from different places, because Article 9 of Paris Agreement has said that you can mobilize finance from different places now, whether developing, philanthropic organizations, wherever. That's it. Then green finance. It's a structured financial activity, a product of service that has been created to ensure a better environmental outcome. Includes an array of loans, debt mechanism, and investments that are used to encourage the development of green projects or minimize the impact of climate of more regular projects. See, this is a real combination. This is from World Economic Forum. And if you really look at this definition, it's talking to us about the private sector finance, basically. There's a whole lot of green finance within the banks, development banks, development finance institutions. They have green finance now. And why they call it green finance is because you can only apply to address the impact of climate change, either climate adaptation or mitigation, and now recently loss and damage. So these are green financing lines that are available in all, even at the local bank level. There are some green financing opportunities that are available. At times they call it LOC, lines of credit, green lines of credit. You could have heard of that. Then let's go to gender responsive climate finance. What is that? This is finance that supports entire communities, including women and women who experience multiple and intersecting inequalities, thereby transforming communities as a whole to become climate resilient. Yes. Gender responsive climate finance has actually came up because of women's agitation to really look at the gender aspect of climate change. And if we're looking at the gender aspect of climate change and we want to deploy finance into climate change, then it means that we must also look at the finance in a gender responsive way. What are we pulling together to make sure that gender issues are critically addressed in this project? And we know as a result of that, most of these multilateral finance funds have now decided to have gender action plan, because there's no way you will do a gender action plan that you will not think around women issues. How does your project affect men? How does it affect women? So, and you will budget some money for it. So it is as a result of this agitation for gender action plans to accompany funding and financing for climate change actions on the ground, then the issue of gender responsive climate finance developed. So these are very, very important. So as we begin to journey into having gender responsive languages within the negotiation, UNFCCC negotiation, also it trickled down to the climate finance too. If we are going to be deploying climate finance, the UNFCCC negotiations that have acknowledged gender, then the finance also must acknowledge gender. That's the basic standard now. Then gender climate smart finance and investment. This is an emerging landscape because over the years we have had what we call genderless investing. What does that mean? It means that private sector basically are the ones that brought this up. They're saying that if you want to invest anywhere, whatever sector, whether infrastructure, anything, why don't you look deep into how this investment can actually address gender inequality? How can this, your investment, contribute to ensuring gender equality? That's the basic standard. So when they started the genderless investing, people started looking at, okay, if I'm going to, let's say I'm going to invest in a sector like infrastructure. So I want to be sure that wherever I'm investing my money, those who are building this infrastructure prioritize employing women in all the jobs line that are going to be created. They prioritize looking at the structure of the building itself, whether it would address the issue of women's using those infrastructure, whether there will be a better toilet for women, whether there will be a place to take care of children, whether there will be a place for exclusive breastfeeding. You see, these are things that investors are now looking for to put their money into, not just, okay, it's going to bring a lot of money, but what impact is it going to make on the ground? So this genderless investing has been applied to investment generally, and it was growing. So while it was growing, the challenges of climate change also became something the current world started addressing. And then with time, the issue of genderless investing is now going into gender gender issues. And that is how we started having gender and climate smart finance. There are investors who want to put their money into into climate change actions where they know women are very active, where they know it will strengthen women's economic empowerment, where they know that more women will be employed, where issue of where workforce gender issues are going to be dealt with, and people have good documentation and policy, human resource policy that really helps women really to be more empowered. So this integrates gender-based factors such as women's leadership, employment, or consumption into investment strategy and analyzes to increase returns and impact and move towards a more equitable world for all. It is relevant in public and private markets and across all asset classes and themes and geographies. Right now, there is a whole lot of climate finance mobilization and investment around gender and climate smart finance because the private sector is gradually seeing its own role in terms of supporting and contributing to gender equality now. And climate finance is enabling that. Climate change is enabling that. Now people are really looking at climate change as a business opportunity. Yes, there are some of the impacts of climate change that are very disastrous, yes, but then we need to begin to flip it to the other side and start looking at the investment opportunities that it creates, especially for SMEs and MSMEs, which a lot of our women, we know that is where we operate in the private sector more than other value chain within the private sector. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Can you hear me well? Jennifer, please, if you can hear, let me know. Somebody is complaining. Good. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you, Titi. Somebody is saying you are low, so maybe if you can project more.
Okay. I'm trying better. I hope it's better now. So
yes, thank you.
So we have to look at climate finance under the UNFCCC because that is where all the negotiations happens. So, like I said earlier, all elements require finance. So if we have looked at the negotiations, I'm sure maybe somebody would have explained the climate negotiations before this climate finance. Because I don't really, if I have to go into climate negotiations again, my slide is going to be very bulky. And I don't want to bore you at all. I want to make it simple as possible. Under the UNFCCC, every year we go for conference of parties to negotiate. What are we negotiating? We are going there to make policies that will help us address climate change effectively. And one of the important negotiations that has been on the table for decades has always been the issue of finance. Where will the finance come from? Who is supposed to provide the finance? Are they providing the finance? And if they are providing it, is it getting to the right places? Those who actually need it, are they getting it? Are they getting it? Those are some of the important questions we need to ask ourselves. And then, especially for those of us who have been to COP before, and if you have not been to COP before, start thinking, maybe the next COP you will be there. These are some of the things they've been discussing. There are different negotiating streams, but I'm going to focus on negotiations on climate finance here. And the reason is because we are talking about climate finance here now. So let's focus on it. One, climate finance negotiations are converging around new collective quantified goal. If I want to go back deep into what has been happening, there are several decisions that have been made. But what is most important that at the status we are in now is that we want to have a global goal on climate finance. And why do we want to have a global goal? If you remember, in Copenhagen, it was agreed that developed countries are going to provide 100 billion per year to address climate change. And that 100 billion per year, over the years, they've not been able to deliver it. And they said it's going to be done by 2020. We have passed 2020, we are in 2024, and they are yet to mobilize as much as 100 billion per year. But then, is that our needs? Is that enough to deal with the enormity of climate change on the ground? So this propelled the convergence around quantified global goal. So how do we ensure that we have enough finance to deal with climate change? To deal with the impacts of climate change in the global south, and especially in Africa. So the struggle to ensure that the right amount of money is actually mobilized and that money gets to the right people started. So by COP29, hopefully we hope that we will get to agree on that global goal. But there are so many issues here. Because when we were hearing about 100 billion per year, nobody knew how they came to that figure. It was a magical figure. But yet, it is on the table. But we still don't have as much as that. And some countries are demanding a commitment of 1 trillion based on different analysis. People have done different analysis. And we, as a developing nation, we are saying it should be 1 trillion, the least, because the amount we need is much more than that 100 billion. But yes, USA is insisting that negotiations should start from a floor of 100 billion rather than just naming some amount. So this is where the negotiation and there are other issues that is attached to it. Into the stuff of those NDs. How do we deal with the issue of loss and damage? So these are very important issues that all of us need to actually start thinking around. And there are some studies that have said that the loss and damage for the whole of the global south is trillions, running into trillions. But now there is operationalization of the loss and damage fund, and we will see how that goes. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. So we have been talking about this finance, what we need and what we don't need. How do we deliver it? What are the mechanisms by which it is delivered? A lot of you must have heard about the Green Climate Fund. We must have heard about Global Environment Facility, Adaptation Fund, Special Climate Change Fund, and the Least Development Countries Fund. These are some of the delivery mechanisms by which climate finance is being delivered, at least under the UNFCCC. But there are other streams by which climate finance can be delivered. Next slide. So here, we have the standing committee also, which is playing a critical role in terms of one of the mechanisms that is to deliver climate finance. It helps the UNFCCC to look at all the financing issues and make decisions around it. And all the climate finance funds, they actually report to COP. Yes, because they are under the UNFCCC, but there are other funds which are not under the UNFCCC. There are different funds. I'm sure even at your local level, there could be some climate finance funds, but some of them are the multilateral development banks, like our AFDB, World Bank. The climate investment funds are under the World Bank, and then maybe International Finance Corporation, IFC, then development finance institutions. All of them, they have different kinds of climate finance, whether it is green finance or climate finance as grants. They are all there, trying also to address the impacts of climate change. So when we say funds will be mobilized, and if it is mobilized, it's going to be mobilized into a particular pool. And that is where we have the multilateral funds, and then the multilateral development banks and other institutions, relevant institutions. Next. And for the standing committee, please note that the standing committee meeting is going to happen in Tanzania in the next 2-3 days. A lot of us will be going to the standing committee to discuss a lot of things around climate finance. And this year, the standing committee is focusing on gender responsive climate finance. And that is where we need a lot of women's voices to add on the table to ensure that gender responsive climate finance is really taken seriously within the climate change space and discussion. Next slide. Now we are going to look at the landscape of climate finance. So here, we want to know how have we received climate finance? What kind of financing is entering into our countries, into our continent, into the whole of global South? It's very important that we look at it from the point of our needs versus the flows. And today I have a very important data on the table. And I also want to implore you to go back and read it thoroughly because there are a lot of findings on this report. As we speak, at least as at 2022, our climate finance need from now till 2030 is supposed to be 9 trillion per year. That is for the whole, looking at the whole world view, and where we are going to, from 2031 to 2050, it will change to 30 trillion. So you see the quantum leap, the way it's going. But the average flows as of now, at least 2021 to 2020, we have almost 1.3 trillion, representing just 1% of the global GDP of developing country. So what is the cost of inaction? We see that it's very huge, and it can lead to global temperature increase. So overall, climate finance flow is extremely low. It is not enough to meet the needs on the ground. Okay, next slide. Let's go to what is the landscape for Africa. Africa landscape. Next slide. For Africa, this is Africa. Our total climate finance flow as of 2020 is 29. No, please still go back to the ecosystem. The last, that one. Please, I need to, yeah. We can jump others, but this one is very important. So, as of 2022, 29.5 billion. 29.5 billion, sorry, between 2019 and 2020. This represents 11% of 277 trillion that we need in total. If we look at the totality of the NDCs of Africa, analyzing it, we need 277 trillion in Africa between 2020 and 2030. And if we look at the flows that we've had, if we look at the flows that we've had 56% loans and grants is 30%. So climate finance is being recycled to us as loans and debts in Africa. More loans than grants. And this calls for concerns. This calls for us as women in Africa to rise up and do a lot of advocacy and hold the developed countries to account on this matter. Next slide. Hello, next slide. Can we go to the next slide? So, we have an ecosystem of climate finance injustice in Africa. And this is the reason why I'm saying so. Developed countries promised 100 billion per year. Our needs per year is 277 billion. Then climate finance flow is just 29.58. That's a huge financing gap, whichever way you look at it. We are not just getting it at all. Then Africa continent is owed almost 10 times the global climate finance it received. Can you imagine that you are owing off 10 times of what we receive, and yet that which you are giving to us as debt? Now, who is supposed to be indebted? Is it the Africa that is supposed to be indebted, or those who have caused climate change that's supposed to be much more indebted to us? Every day, the debt of Africa is rising. And yet, the debt they hold us in terms of climate finance is not coming, it's not trickling down at all. And then finance flows targeting adaptation in Africa fell by billions of USD, short of the lowest adaptation cost estimates. If you look at the adaptation estimate, it's really not it at all. The maths, it's not really counting. So whether we like it or not, finance flow is very low and it's not helpful. And between 2010 and 2019, more than 3/4 of the total public climate development finance in Africa failed to consider gender. And that's the worst part. We've been talking about gender, Lima Work Program, Gender Action Plan, everything. And at the end of the day, all the money that has been sent, at least these small ones that we are getting, 2010 to 2019, almost 10 years, a decade. So all of them are not considering gender. Gender is in access to finance in Africa generally is USD 42 billion. So we have a gender financing gap in Africa, which is 42 billion, according to the African Development Bank. So this is the injustice that we are facing. Not that we are only facing it as African continent. As women in African continent, we are facing a gender financing gap in the climate sector. And something needs to be done about that by me and you. Next slide. So I want to show you some of the decisions, gender and climate finance under the UNFCCC, COP17, decision on finance and technology include gender considerations. These are very important. A new gender focal point is established in climate investment funds, CIF, to oversee gender action. These are things happening every day. Even all the funds have started adopting the Gender Action Plan. Yeah, adopts a gender action plan with targets for gender responsive finance. That's COP23. That was done. That's a decision. Then the Green Climate Fund, too, adopted its gender action plan and gender policy. We also look at COP26. Countries commit to putting gender equality at the forefront of climate action and finance. These are important commitments. But is the commitment really translating to reality on the ground? No. If we look at the data that I've presented. Next slide. So, access to climate finance. Apart from the fact that the flows are not much, we also have some access challenges. To get the ones that have been released, how do we get them? How do we ensure that it works for us? That's a big issue also entirely. Meeting the criteria for access is one big issue. Lack of capacity to put up bankable projects also has been there. Limited direct access entities because of meeting up with accreditation criteria. A lot of you who have been following climate finance, we understand that before you can get money from all these entities, you must be a direct access entity or international accredited entity or national implementing entity. Those are the big words. And to become these entities, you have to put loads and loads of documentation. It can take you 2, 5, 6 years. Some people have been there almost 8, 7 years. They are not getting it. Even Nigeria just got its own direct access entity since the time they've started pursuing it. I think they started pursuing it around 2017. Now this is 2024. They just got it last month. I think 2 months ago. Yeah, last month at the GCF. Some African countries are yet not having it. So for you to get a direct access and for you to write a proposal, of course, writing a proposal for this large funds, it's not a tea party at all. It takes time. So by the time you get direct access, you will start now writing your proposal. And that will take some time also. And then before they now sign your accreditation master agreement, and then before the money starts flowing, it takes a lot of time. And for women, that's a double problem. Access is very challenging for us as women due to complicated access process. You can imagine the processes are not smiling at all on us. And a whole lot of us even don't have what it takes really to apply. And then women and financial instruments are not suited to women's needs. Some of the financial instruments they are putting on the table, they are not something that works for women. And the reason it's not working is because they never consulted us before they start putting on these instruments. So there's need for a lot of consultations with women so that they'll be able to get some important financial instruments that will work for us so that we'll be able to get this climate finance. Then limited knowledge about climate finance and how to assess. A lot of you have said it. You have rated yourself this today. And you know that you still have a lot of deficiency in terms of understanding what climate finance means. Even me that I'm talking to you, there are some aspects that I'm still grappling with till today. But at least, thank God, I understand the way it is going and the processes. But we need more African women to understand the climate finance process, because the more you understand it, the better for you to be able to put up aggressive advocacy for increased climate finance for Africa. Then, private sector finance demanding collateral and high interest on loans. You know, we have said that what we want is grants. And if we must have a loan, it must at very concessionary rates. But if you look at some of these funds and some of the financing that is being churned out, of course, we know that 56%, we have more of loans. And by the time you are getting the loans, she's on. It is never in the spirit of climate justice. And then limited consultation with women's group before developing financial instruments. These are issues. What I have outlined there, they are not all, they are just a snapshot of some of the challenges. There are other deeper challenges by the time you start going through the processes. So how do we position ourselves as African women to access climate finance? That is very important for us, because I know a lot of us have been in this space. You've not been able to even access funds to do your projects, to do one thing or the other. I have just mentioned about 5 here. And I think it will be important for us, maybe before I finish my presentation here, for us to go into groups. And I'm going to tell us what we are going to do in the group session, because it's going to really be looking at how do we position ourselves based on all that you have heard. How do we position ourselves? What are the recommendations we want to put on the table for us to actually not only access climate finance, but to be able to engage climate finance, because engagement is different from access. In the area of engagement, you will look at what is happening, you will make informed inputs and what they call it, feedback. Like some of you who, if you have really been working with me as a gender monitor under the GCF, you will know that we send some of these proposals to you to look at, to review whether it truly reflects what you want on the ground. So those are the kinds of engagement we are thinking about. And then how do we hold them to account? That is that kind of engagement. How do we add our voices to policy documents? How are we supposed to, how do we get to that policy table where climate finance is being allocated, issues are being discussed, and many of us have been at this table before? Yes, me, myself, that I go there. Going there is one thing. Them allowing you to speak and to say the issues, the real on-ground issues that is affecting your people, it's another thing entirely. I'm telling you, there are different hurdles to go through. But I believe that we are all African women. We have the time and chance this afternoon to reflect critically and bring up good recommendations that will help us to engage, and the one that will also position us and our organizations for finance. Because it is not only that we are agitating and advocating for increased climate finance that will come to us as women's group, but also that we are part of those who shape how these finances are allocated. These are two important things that we must do. So before I finish, I don't know, Jennifer, do we have some time to fall into some groups, 2 groups?
Yes, Titi, this session is going to come to an end by 3 o'clock. So the whole meeting is scheduled to end by 3 o'clock.
So we have
still
about
have
30 minutes.
26 minutes. We have 26
Oh,
minutes.
great. So can we take some, let's say, about 20 minutes to quickly break into 2 groups? And then the first question is, how do we engage with climate finance? I've explained it to you. And the second one is, how do we position ourselves as African women?
All right. Okay. Ken, are you there?
Climate finance.
Hello, Ken. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so we are going to break the group. We're going to break out for the group work. Ken is going to assign the participants to groups.
So let's have 2 groups. One that will talk about engagement. How do we engage? How do we follow loss and damage? How do you follow the Green Climate Fund? How do you follow Adaptation Fund? What are the things we need to do? What are the important issues that is really like a barrier for getting to that engagement, engaging with those spaces? And then 2, how do we position ourselves to receive climate finance? Either at the global level, the region, or in our countries.
Okay, so I think if you are in the French-speaking country, you can indicate by maybe raising up your hand so that we see how the French participants are all in one group for easy communication. Please, if you are a Francophone participant, please indicate by raising up your hand so that you'll be sent to the Okay, hello everyone. So we are in this group and maybe we should start leading the conversation on how African, what I think we have to do the second group, or is it the first group? Hello Titi, can you hear me?
Ira.
Hello all. Hello, Jennifer. Do we still have time?
Hello, Titi.
Yeah, I'm asking, do we still have time for report
Time
back?
up.
No, our time is almost gone. And also to inform participants, they've dropped the form, the attendance form in the chat
Nous
box. It was
sommes
dropped a while ago.
achevés. Il y a la liste des participants qui sera disponible dans le groupe. Veuillez inscrire vos noms, préciser en indice FR, français, participant français.
Okay, it will be the form will be shared again for those who missed it. So maybe briefly, participants have already had the conversation, and I don't know if we are going to go over the conversations again or it was
I
already
think
done.
what we will do is that we have group leaders, those who maybe they can just view because in the group I was in, they took a very important note. So they can send it to you by email.
Okay.
Or what do you think?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I'll collect it by email and share with you. And
yeah, I think it's Mary. I can't remember her name. Maybe people should signify those who wrote down the report. Issues that people raised.
Okay, so maybe just to just the leader from the other group, from my group, it was Beatrice. I will get Beatrice to share the notes with me. Yes. Then from the other group, if you can hear me, I think Martina.
Yes,
okay.
It is okay.
Okay, so Martina, you can share the discussion with me, the notes with me, either directly on WhatsApp or via mail, and we'll compile them together. Yes. So
we are still waiting for the registration form in the chat.
Okay, it will be dropped in the chat box again. So if there are any questions that you want Titi to respond to.
And I think
hello, Titi, I can't hear you. You are breaking.
I think I saw some questions in the chat box before. Somebody was asking what is the composition of the Standing Committee on Finance. So we have 20 countries. From developing countries and 10 from developed countries. You can go to UNFCCC website, just type it and it will pop up the names of those. I think Uganda is one of in that committee. Namibia also is in that committee. Those are the ones I can remember. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Titi, yesterday there was a question that we carried over waiting for this session. A participant was asking how can we assess this financing as African women, but I believe you actually did justice to that when you were taking your session, but if you can still give another direct response to it.
Okay, for Africa, as African women, one thing that is very important for us is that we must, because some of these funds are very large, and even some of our biggest organizations may not be able to access. One important thing that we have been discussing amongst ourselves, especially for the gender monitors, is how do we position some of our women's fund in Africa to get this fund on our behalf and distribute the way they've been doing. And I can give a good example of what African Women Development Fund is doing. They are doing a whole lot to give finance for people to address the issues of climate change, especially at the local level. So we can position African Women Development Fund to be that fund that will assess it on our behalf and then distribute it to us. That is one important thing that we can all rally around to work towards. And if we also want to form what I call a collaborative way of doing it, I am a member of Women Gender Constituency. I'm also a member of African Climate Justice Movement, of course, which comprises of a lot of women. These two African movements can join together to mobilize funds for us. It is something we can think around. because I know that the African movement is well organized and coordinated. So we can join hands. We're all Africans. All we want is climate finance to deal with the issues. So it depends. Let us look at that. And that will bring a lot of solidarity, a lot of strong connection among us. And it will help us to also help some of our local organizations that are struggling to come up. I remember, in fact, recently, African Justice, the Climate Justice Movement gave funding to organizations that are, below 3 years to start doing a lot around climate change in their countries. And what they did was to bring together all the members of the movement. They were the ones that sat on the committee to decide who gets the movement. By ourselves, we decided the criteria by which people will get it. And a lot of our young organizations are getting funding, at least something from around $10,000, $20,000, which is quite something for a startup. And this is the way I want it to be. I think it will work for all of us because all of us are not on the same level in terms of accessing funding. So let us start from the lowest level and see what we can do, how we can lift up ourselves as sisters. I think that is two important advice that I want to give on this matter. And if we want the bigger one, like I said, let's position our African women's funds to collect. There are other African women's funds, they are not African, sorry, but there are other women's funds, like equality funds, like the Gaga and things, which have been really working well for African women. Fine, those two can also try to access funds, but over the years, they've been more coordinated. They go together to look for funding. But this is another opportunity for us as African-based finance organization to collaborate to mobilize funding together. And it will work well for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Titi. Just like you said, sometimes some of these funds are available, but they have a very tedious way to access them, and then the stringent requirements that some people may not be able to reach. But if we come together in a coalition or collaboration, it's easier to access such funding. I hope that our colleagues who are participating are going to learn about this and also work on fostering their collaborations with other networks. Earlier, Zukiswa shared the link for us to join the WGC network. I will also be sharing the link to join the African WGC. And so through there, you can access some of these opportunities. Thank you very much, Titi. Faustina, please, if you can hear me, unmute and speak because we are trying to round up.
Thank you very much. We can also access funding from the African Development Bank, from the World Bank, from the Green Climate Fund. They have funding for civil society organizations, you understand, because they also have gender policies as far as climate and other things are concerned. I know about the World Bank gender policy. I know about the AFDB gender policy. And the GCF gender policy, if you are a member of the WGC, you should be able to know it. The Paris Agreement and in Paris, they had a gender action plan and all that. So these organizations, and the GCF is also giving.
Okay, Titi, if you can round up your, first,
please.
If you can round up your talk.
I'm saying that these banks, multilateral banks, the GCF is giving money to companies, banks, and other companies in country. And we should learn about all these projects that are going on and then tap into them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Faustina. So as informed earlier, this is why this program is happening, so that we bring African women activists, climate activists together in a platform and a network to enhance alliance building and network building, so that we can access such information and subsequently such information will be shared across. Also, okay, so that's all. I don't see any hands up. So Titi, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for taking us through this very enlightening session to learn more on on how to access such financing as African women or African activists. I hope that we have leverage on this knowledge and we'll be able to guide our work and access most of this funding as we have learned about them today. Thank you very much, our participants, for joining in today, for staying on the call throughout the time. Your commitment is quite applaudable. I am very impressed, and thank you on behalf of the African Women Agenda constituency. Please accept our gratitude to you for your commitment throughout this session. If you can hear me and you're on the call, and you can please unmute your video so that we can have a brief snapshot with Titi before she exits. So please, you can share your video so that we can take a snapshot. Okay. You can turn on your camera so that we can take. Wow, beautiful. So many beautiful faces. Hi. I'm good to see. Okay, so I'm going to take the first slide. I'm going to take the first slide, and then after that, I will move to the second slide. Hi, good to see you guys. Okay. Okay, I'm going to the second slide and then the third slide. Hello, I'm not seeing cameras on. Okay, I'm on the second slide and I can't see any cameras that are turned on. Blessing, I can't see your camera. Austin, Miriam, your cameras are not on.
Where I am is dark. I don't know if, let me turn it on and see if.
Okay, Jordana, Melissa, Shireen, Azita, Didi, I can't see your cameras. Faith. Oh, okay.
You
Maybe
done with me?
I can just move to the next. Okay.
Can you see me at all?
I've gotten the first slide, so it's fine. Maybe we'll take more pictures tomorrow. Okay. Okay.
I don't see me. I'm driving, so I need to stop.
Yes, I can see you, Charity. I can see you. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We'll reconvene tomorrow for the next session. We'll be taking loss and damage, and then we'll also be looking at negotiation issues that affect African women, especially how to negotiate at the coming COP29. Yes, so we'll be taking those two sessions tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining. The slides will be put together and will be shared to you.
Thank you.
Yes, please fill the attendance. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.